The sky outside your window has gone the colour of old pewter. The wind is picking up. You can feel the pressure in your ears before you can see it in the clouds. And you do what most people do. You look out at your yard, at the feeder swaying slightly on its hook, at the empty branches, and you think, where did they go? A moment ago there were birds everywhere. A chickadee working the suet block. A pair of house finches on the tube feeder. A white-throated sparrow is scratching through the leaf litter beneath the shrubs. And now, as the storm rolls in, they are simply gone. Vanished. The yard feels emptied, as if someone pulled a plug. Most people assumed the birds flew away. But they retreated somewhere distant, a barn, a forest, a sheltered hillside far from here. But the truth is far more precise than that, far more deliberate, and in ways that I think will genuinely shift how you see your yard from this point forward. The birds didn't leave your property. In most cases, they didn't even leave your yard. They went into the storm the way a submarine goes into the deep, not fleeing it, but going through it, pressed low, sealed tight, invisible against everything. What looks like absence is actually an extraordinary feat of survival happening within a few dozen feet of where you are standing right now. Welcome to the Hidden Mind of Birds. Today, we are going to go through exactly what happens to the birds in your yard when a storm comes. Not in general terms. I mean the specific behaviours, the physiological changes, the micro decisions that small wild birds make in the hours before, during and after severe weather. And stay until the end, because the last thing we cover, what birds do in the hours after a storm passes, is something that completely reframes what you thought you understood about the relationship between birds and your yard. The hours before the storm arrive, and why the birds know before you do. Pay attention to this one, because it starts earlier than you think. You have probably noticed, if you watch your feeders regularly, that there are certain mornings when the birds arrive in unusual numbers. Not a few house sparrows and a chickadee, a crowd. Species you haven't seen in days suddenly appear together, a white-breasted nuthatch, 2 downy woodpeckers, a whole flock of juncos working the ground beneath the feeder, more goldfinches than usual clinging to the Niger sock, and then the storm comes. Not immediately, maybe 6, 8, 10 hours later. This is not a coincidence. Birds are sensing the storm well before any forecast tells you it is coming. The mechanism here is barometric pressure. Birds have a sensory structure in their inner ear called the vitelli organ, a tiny pressure-sensitive structure that is far more sensitive to atmospheric changes than anything in the human body. Research published in the journal PLOS One confirmed that birds can detect drops in barometric pressure that happen well in advance of storm arrival, changes subtle enough that most weather apps wouldn't flag them as meaningful yet. The birds register this drop, and it triggers an immediate behavioural response: eat now. Eat as much as possible. This is your yard's version of panic buying, and it is absolutely rational. A dark-eyed junco, for example, weighs somewhere around 20 grams. It burns through fuel at a rate that would be extraordinary by human standards. Its metabolism, even at rest, is running hot. In cold, wet, windy conditions, the energy cost of staying warm rises sharply. So in the hours before a major storm, a junco that visits your feeder is not being casual. It is loading up. It is adding grams of fat that it will burn through in the hours ahead, the way a hiker loads a pack before a hard trail. The finches at your tube feeder are doing the same thing. So are the sparrows. So is the mockingbird that works through your holly berries with unusual urgency on certain mornings. What looks like a busy day at the feeder is actually a distributed survival response happening across every bird on your property at once, coordinated not by communication, but by shared sensory experience. There is something worth sitting with in that. Every bird in your yard on those busy storm morning visits is engaged in the same quiet calculation: can I make it through what is coming? Where they actually go, the anatomy of a storm shelter. When the pressure drops far enough and the birds have fed as much as they can, they disappear. Specifically, they go to the densest, most protected vegetation available to them within their immediate territory, not far, not to the next neighbourhood. Within your yard, or the shrubs along your fence line, or the evergreen hedge 2 houses down that backs up to your yard's edge. A dark-eyed junco, according to research from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, will move into dense low shrubs, often within a few feet of the ground, and simply stay there. It will flatten itself slightly, fluff its feathers to trap as much air as possible against its body, and orient itself away from the prevailing wind direction. It is not doing nothing. It actively manages its thermal environment with its body. The cardinal in your yard, the male you have been watching all winter, will move into the interior of the densest shrub he knows, not the edge, the interior. Research on northern cardinals shows a strong preference for native shrubs with complex branching structure during storm events: hawthorns, hollies, native viburnums. The interlocking branches break the wind, reduce the chill factor dramatically, and provide a kind of lattice that the bird can grip from multiple angles to stay stable in dusting conditions. The black-capped chickadee, when a serious storm arrives, will use a cavity if one is available. A natural tree hollow, a gap in a fence post, occasionally an occupied nest box, even outside of breeding season. Researchers at the University of Vermont found that chickadees actively scout and remember the locations of suitable cavities throughout their range and will retreat to them during severe weather. One chickadee they tracked used the same hollow branch during every major winter storm across 2 consecutive seasons. The bird knew exactly where to go. It had planned for this. Stay with me here, because this is where it gets strange in the best possible way. On your property, right now, there are micro-habitats, little pockets of wind protection, thermal cover, and structural shelter that the birds in your yard have already mapped. They have assessed the holly bush by your back gate. They know which side of your spruce tree breaks the northwest wind. They are aware of the gap between your fence and the shed, where the wind shear is lowest. They have been gathering this information during every ordinary day of flight and foraging that you have watched from your window. The storm doesn't catch them off guard. They have already made a plan. What they do during the storm, the stillness that is not stillness. Here is what you would see if you could part the branches of the shrub where a junco has gone to wait out her storm. A small bird, feathers raised into a near perfect sphere, eyes half closed, almost motionless. It looks like stillness. It is the opposite of stillness. Inside that fluff body, the bird's physiology is doing something extraordinary. On the surface level, the raised feathers create an insulating layer, trapping a sleeve of warm air directly against the skin. This is the same principle as a down jacket, and it is every bit as effective. A bird can reduce its heat loss by up to 40% simply by fluffing correctly. A 40% reduction in heat loss is the difference between burning through all its reserves and having enough left over to survive. Below the surface, something more remarkable is happening. Many small birds engage in what researchers call regulated nocturnal hypothermia, a deliberate lowering of their core body temperature during periods of inactivity. The black-capped chickadee, studied extensively on this by Susan Budd Chaplin at the University of Rochester, can drop its nighttime body temperature by up to 12 degrees Celsius below its active daytime temperature. It does this deliberately, the way you might turn a thermostat down when you leave the house. It is not sick. It is not dying. It is conserving fuel with precision that would be extraordinary in any organism, let alone one that weighs less than a golf ball. During a daytime storm, the same physiology kicks in. Movement generates heat, but movement also costs calories and exposes the bird to wind and wet. Stillness is the strategy. The bird sits. It breathes. It waits. And this is happening in the shrubs in your yard, while you are inside watching the rain streak your window. What you are looking at when you see an empty yard during a storm is not absence. It is concealment. The birds are there. They are just doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing, and they are doing it so well that you cannot find them. The species that take different approaches, and what that tells us. Not every bird responds to a storm by going still. And understanding who does what reveals something important about the deeper logic of bird survival strategy. The American crow will fly in a storm when most birds will not. Crows are large enough, averaging around 450 grams, compared to the junco's 20, that wind and rain impose a much lower proportional cost on their movement. During a storm, crows will often ride rising air currents, calling loudly, moving through the landscape. They have been documented in studies from the University of Washington, actively foraging during moderate storms, taking advantage of the reduced competition. Smaller birds are all sheltering, and the crows have the landscape largely to themselves. The American woodcock takes a different approach entirely. During major storm events along their migration corridor, woodcocks will sometimes ground stop in enormous numbers, thousands of birds per square mile, simply sitting motionless in dense forest understory and leaf litter until conditions improve. Birders who know to look for this have documented woodcock literally sitting at their feet during post-storm walks in appropriate habitat. The birds are not injured. They are not disoriented. They are executing a hard pause in an otherwise non-stop migration schedule with the patience of something much larger and slower than they are. The European starling and its North American cousins in your yard has a third strategy: the group. Starlings roost communally in ordinary conditions, but during storms they pack together with unusual density. Research published in Animal Behavior documented storm-related roost aggregations, where starling densities increase by a factor of 6 compared to ordinary nights. The physics of this are elegant. A packed group of birds reduces the exposed surface area per individual, and the collective body heat of hundreds of birds raises the microclimate inside the roost by measurable degrees. Your yard may not host a starling roost, but the same principle applies on a smaller scale to the mixed species flocks that form in dense shrubs during storms. A junco pressed against a song sparrow is borrowing heat. Both birds are warmer for the company. What happens in the hours after? The part that changes everything. This is the part I promised you at the beginning. And I want you to think back to your yard, because you have probably seen this without knowing what it was. After a storm passes, sometimes within minutes of the rain stopping, sometimes within an hour of the wind dropping, the birds come back. Not slowly, not gradually, all at once. Your feeder goes from empty to full in what feels like seconds. Every species that disappeared reappears simultaneously. The juncos are on the ground. The chickadees are on the suet. The finches are at the tube feeder. The new thatch is working the bark of your oak from the bottom up, the way it always does. And if you didn't know better, you might think they had all just flown in from somewhere distant, summoned by the clearing sky. They didn't fly in from somewhere distant. They were 30 feet away the entire time. What you are watching in those post-storm minutes is a coordinated re-emergence driven by the same barometric sensory mechanism that drove the pre-storm feeding frenzy. The pressure rises. Every bird on your property registers the change at the same moment. And every bird responds the same way. The storm is over. Now is the time to eat, move. The Cornell Lab's research on post-storm bird activity has documented that foraging intensity in the hours immediately after a major storm event is among the highest recorded at any time of year. The birds are not just hungry in an ordinary sense. They have burned through significant reserves during the storm, and their bodies are signalling urgency. A junco that spent 6 hours sitting still in your holly bush, running its metabolism at a reduced rate, still burned through a meaningful fraction of what it loaded up on that morning. It needs to replace that fuel before the temperature drops again tonight. This is why experienced birdwatchers know to step outside immediately after a storm. Not the next day, not after lunch, immediately. In the first hour after the rain stops and the wind settles, your yard is more alive with bird activity than it is almost any other time. The feeders are busy, the ground is working, and every shrub is rattling with movement. It lasts for a few hours, and then it settles back into the ordinary rhythm of a day. But now you know what that ordinary rhythm has been built on top of. You know about the pressure sensor in the inner ear. You know about the cardinal in the interior of the holly bush, gripping the branches, feathers raised to a sphere, body temperature regulated to the degree. You know about the chickadee that memorized the location of the hollow branch 3 seasons ago and returned to it this morning without hesitation. The sky outside your window is clearing now. The pewter colour is going thin at the edges, and somewhere in the direction of the feeder, a chickadee is calling that 2-note whistle, high then low. That sounds like it is asking a question. It was in the shrubs 20 minutes ago. It was 30 feet from where you stood watching the empty yard. It has been living beside you, mapping your yard, memorising its shelter points, calculating its reserves, making its plans. It wasn't gone during the storm. It was simply doing what it has done for thousands of generations, disappearing so completely into the landscape that you could stand 2 arms lengths away and never know it was there. That kind of competence in a creature that weighs less than a stack of coins is worth more than a moment's thought. Tell me in the comments, have you ever noticed your feeders go suddenly busy right before a storm or come alive immediately after one? Have you ever found a bird hunkered down in your yard during heavy rain and had no idea what it was doing? I want to hear your stories. I read everyone. I'll see you in the next one.